Right, so if I look a bit manic, it's because I'm doing my August reading wrap-up thing, and I read a lot of books, and I have a tendency to ramble, as we all know, on this channel, so keep it concise. So the first book I read in August was The Disreputable History of Frankie Landau Banks by E. Lockhart, and I completely fell in love with this book. I gave it 5 stars. So this follows Frankie, who is a 15 or maybe 16-year-old student at a boarding school, so is very privileged boarding school in America, and she starts dating this guy, and she finds out that he is a member of this all-male secret society, and she gets angry at this patriarchal system and decides to play them at their own game without their knowledge. E. Lockhart's characters are so real and vivid, and her writing is so addictive. I flew through this book in like 2 days. And it flawlessly incorporates feminist themes. It's not like, oh, let's have a chat about feminism and there's a huge section of theory. It's really not like that at all. It's just these characters and their friends trying to find their place in this kind of toxic masculine society, and also questioning the way that they're being treated, but not in the way that's like, oh my god, we're so oppressed. The tone of the book is actually quite funny, quite cheeky, and it's very, very enjoyable to read, and it just kind of empowers you rather than brings you down. And it perfectly portrays that contrast of her being very privileged, but also kind of being a second-class citizen. And I could kind of relate to that because I went to an all-girls private school on a scholarship, so I had this kind of privileged upbringing, I guess you would say, but then also I feel very, very worried about going into the career that I'm going into, which is film, which is a very male dominated industry. So I get that contrast of feeling like you're privileged and that you can't complain about your life, but also feeling so overwhelmed by everything that's to come, and that the way that you're going to be viewed by society. And I just loved how Frankie was going through this inner conflict of kind of wanting to play the boys at their own game and wanting to prove herself to them that she was as capable and as good as they were, but then also not wanting their approval at the same time, not wanting to need their approval, if that makes sense. And that was perfectly portrayed, and I think that's something that a lot of people go through, and I'd never really seen it in YA literature before. Although some of the reviews I saw said that they didn't like Frankie as a character because she lied, or that, you know, she took it too far, or blah 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 blah, or that she wasn't likable. And I just wanted to say I hate this trope of people seeing a leading female character and thinking that they have to be likable. As for some reason, because we rarely get strong female representation, that every female character has to be a role model and has to make all the right decisions. No. You want a character for girls to look up to. You don't want someone who's perfect and makes all the right decisions all the time. You want someone who makes the wrong decisions but then realizes that, makes mistakes, and then grows as a person. That's much more of a helpful character arc for someone to look up to and for someone to see. We don't want to idolize people that make all the right decisions. We want to learn from the ones that don't. Not all women have to be likable. Not all women have to be strong characters. Let women be vulnerable. Let women be weak in fiction. Let women be human. It's really, really annoying. So yeah, I just had to get that out in some shape or form. But yeah, please read this book. It's incredible. I loved it. So good. The next book I read was the Manifesto on How to Be Interesting, and I didn't enjoy this as much, which is sad. So it's basically like Mean Girls. So this girl decides that she wants to be interesting. In order to be interesting, she has to be popular at high school. So she goes and has this big makeover, wears makeup, changes her clothes, drops her geeky friend and starts hanging out, or trying to hang out with the popular crew, develops a crush on the kind of popular guy and whatever. So she's like kind of morphing into this popular girl, but it's for research, and she's documenting it on this blog because she wants to be a writer. But she was told by a male teacher that in order to be a good writer, her life should be more interesting. So that's why this project starts, basically. There were bits where she was hanging out with the popular girls and they were talking about makeup, and she was in her head going, oh, you know, I'd rather be talking about Virginia Woolf, I bet they don't know who she is. And it's like she's shaming these girls for liking makeup and not liking Virginia Woolf, and she suddenly is surprised when she finds out that the popular girls have feelings and that they can relate to some of her struggles. And it's like, yeah, okay. So I spent a lot of the book just waiting for her to realize that she was wrong, and waiting for her to have this epiphany that like popular girls are people, everyone has their own struggles in high school, you know, that's what happens. And then obviously things start to kind of go wrong, and there's conflict towards the end of the novel, and she writes this blog post basically saying, I'm waiting for everything to wrap up. I'm waiting for this happy ending, for this catharsis to my experiment, but I don't know if it's coming. I've really messed things up and I'm in loads of trouble, and I don't know if it's ever going to fix itself, because real life doesn't just wrap up neatly in like convenient packages. And I thought that was really interesting. I was like, wow, that's really interesting to end your book on a kind of not down note, but on something that's a bit more realistic. But then as soon as that blog post is in the novel, then the ending comes and it just wraps everything up in a neat little package, and I was like, what you just said? And then at the end suddenly like everything just writes itself and the problems are solved, and she just gets everything that she wanted at the start of the novel. So it's like, what was the point, I guess? I don't know. Then I read Lorelei, which is like this fantasy story, but it's also incorporated with real life elements. It's about this mermaid, Lorelei, and she decides that she wants to join the human world. So at the beginning of the novel, she surfaces and she meets a human, and he kind of guides her through, you know, human nature. But she's part of the Royal Mermaid family, so obviously the Royal Mermaid family want her back. And this novel really interestingly deals with how our society would react if we found out about fantastical creatures, like, you know, how they would report it in the news and what the effects would be. And I'd never ever seen that in a kind of fantasy novel really like properly explored. And there was also a bit in the novel where there was a personified version of the sea, so the sea itself had chapters in the novel telling the story from its point of view, and I thought that was really interesting. Some of the pacing felt a little bit off to me. I felt like it took quite a while for things to link up and to get going, and also I did not care for the romantic relationship at all. That happened way too fast and it didn't feel natural. It kind of felt maybe shoehorned in a little bit just to kind of appease people who were looking for that. And it's not even just that they characters get together, it's that when they do, they become each other's sole motive, and that just kind of annoyed me a little bit. But I would definitely read more from this author, and I think the sequel to this book is out and I definitely am interested in reading that. And then I read Saga Volume 7. Everyone knows I bloody love Saga. I gave this 5 stars simply because I think I hadn't read Saga in a while, so I just got reminded how much I love Saga. And also it's kind of like a standalone story. Obviously it has the same characters and you won't probably get it if you just pick up this one, but it was a separate type of story, and it dealt with themes of being a refugee and being on the run, and just in the current political climate that really hit home for me. And obviously the art is beautiful and the writing is amazing, and I loved it so much. Next I read Neverwhere, which is a fantasy novel by Neil Gaiman, and it follows Richard, who is this normal guy, and one day he gets dragged into this world, this fantasy world that exists below London. And there's a cast of crazy characters down there, and there's amazing kind of different settings and really cool places, and they're all based around the London Underground system. So and the tube line, and I thought it was really interesting. I'd never really seen kind of a merging of, I guess, London culture but in a fantasy setting. It was very interesting and I really liked how it was done. However, this book took me quite a long time to read, which is rare for me. I usually finish a book quite quickly, and if I'm taking longer to read it, it's either because I'm immersed in it or it's long, but I feel like here I just was a little bit disconnected with it. There are lots and lots of plot points, and in places you're with one character for a paragraph or two, then you switched with a completely different character, and it could be a new one that you haven't met before, and then after a page or two it will switch back to different characters doing different things. And while that was exciting and it meant that there was a lot going on, it also meant that I found it quite hard to keep track of. Every time I picked the book back up, it would take me a good 15-20 minutes reading it to try and remember what was happening and the plot points and to get reacquainted with the world. And I think that just made it a little bit hard to engage with it for me. The ideas were there, but I just feel like I wasn't completely immersed in it as I wanted to be, which is a little bit of a disappointment. And then I read Wishful Drinking and Chocoholic by Carrie Fisher. She is so funny and she's so intelligent, and she talks about really serious issues without it being depressing. She kind of has this self-deprecating wit, but it's so refreshing and it's so unique as well, because she's talking about her life but within a celebrity context, and it's a really interesting insight into that life. And she acknowledges her mistakes and, you know, things that have gone wrong in her life, but without shaming herself. You know, obviously she doesn't justify the bad things that she's done, like she suffered with a drug addiction and she obviously regrets how that affects her family, but she doesn't ever shame herself. It's kind of, the tone is like, I'm trying and that's all I can do, I'm being honest about it and that's all I can do. After reading both of them, you feel like you've just been catching up with a friend. And I would say that Wishful Drinking is kind of like the conversation that you have at midnight at a sleepover and everyone's hyped up on sugar and everyone's telling jokes and it's really fun and it's just a really good time and you're being open and honest and you're bonding. Whereas Shockaholic is like the conversation that you have at 4 a.m. where everyone's a little bit quieter and they're getting a bit more vulnerable and people are kind of like really connecting and like understanding each other. The tonal shifts between these two books are definitely there, but the kind of themes and the conversational and unique tone is the same, and I loved them both. And the last book in August I read was The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas, and I've wanted to read this for so long and this has been so hyped up, and I will tell you this now, the hype is merited. It completely deserves every single 5-star review, every single rave comment. This is absolutely stunning and it's a must read in, you know, today's climate. This follows Star, a black teenager, and she grew up in kind of a rough area in a rough neighborhood, and she's straddling that life with also going to quite a posh suburban high school, and she has a white boyfriend and she's kind of struggling with the two identities that she has. But then one day her best friend from childhood, Khalil, gets shot by a white police officer and she's the only witness, and it's about how she grapples with herself dealing with his death and kind of emotional impact, but then also the political impact and that struggle to speak up when all she really wants to do is be silent and grieve for her friend. And the thing is, it's not just a book about politics, it's not just worth reading for the political context. It's an incredibly well told story about family and about grief and about friendship and about identity and finding yourself. The family in this book was so vivid and they were so supportive of Star, and I loved that. In YA, family is often brushed over in favour of romance or a fantasy setting, but this was incredible. You really saw a family coming together and supporting each other, and it's so important, and I want to just shove this book on every single person that I meet. You have to read it. It's absolutely stunning and I can't wait for the film. I can't wait for it to get even more praise when that comes out, and it just deserves it all, honestly. It's so incredible. So that's everything that I've been reading in August. Please let me know what you've been reading or if you have any opinions on the books that I've been reading. Yeah, and I'll see you soon with another video. Bye!